economy and government reporter, and she was telling us about the investments that are now in jeopardy, given, of course, the immigration raid on that Hyundai and LG plant in Georgia, and perhaps the uncertainty when it comes to some of those Korean businesses, when it comes to putting billions of dollars of investments at work. Actually, take a look at this graph, because we're talking about $350 billion already pledged by South Korea. I understand that there's also separate billions of dollars of funds pledged by private companies, $550 billion also coming from Japan and the likes of the UAE, Qatar, more than $1 trillion each. But given the uncertainty over perhaps the U.S. immigration picture, visa issues as well, what could this mean for these investments going into the U.S.? Let's bring in Bloomberg political contributor Jeanne Zaino. She's also a visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Jeanne, always really good to have you with us. Are we seeing this divergence and discrepancy when it comes to how the Trump administration handles these immigration visa issues and also requesting more investments for the United States?
Yeah, we absolutely are. And, you know, I'm just listening to the clip you played of the president of South Korea, and the word he used is the one that we're hearing over here a lot. It is absolutely baffling. The raid is the largest we've ever seen in American history in a workplace, and it was a raid 10 days after his visit to the United States and the call from the Trump administration to invest billions of dollars to do exactly what they were doing in that plant, which makes the raid baffling. And then just to add to that, what you were just talking about, which is the treatment of the people during the raid, the shackling, the way in which they had so much force on the ground for people who are simply doing their jobs. And so it is, from every sort of perspective, part of a nationwide crackdown on immigration here, but baffling against a very close ally in South Korea. And to your point, a contradiction when, as it pertains to Trump's stated goal of reshoring and building manufacturing and pursuing foreign investments, and the immigration policy that he has been working with from his first to now his second term that has become increasingly militarized.
The outrage from the American public, though, also comes that these workers, foreign workers, are working in their country without proper authorization, right? Is there an understanding among the American public that visa issues need to be sorted for skilled workers to come in?
You know, I don't think there's a good deal of understanding of the process, but the process is broken. It has been broken for a long time. I think there is outrage amongst the unions as it pertains to bringing over workers. But the reality is the jobs, plural, that those workers were doing would take 3 to 5 years of training for American workers to do. So the practice has long been to bring over skilled workers and train American workers. Even the president has been, cognizant of that reality. But I do think the unions get frustrated as they get concerned about jobs being taken. But the fact is, we don't have the skills over here for the workers to do those jobs. And the visa process is broken. Moreover, it is the Trump administration that capped the H-1B visas, making it almost impossible to bring over the skilled workers they need. And just from a political perspective, the concern I think many of us have over here is that the administration is at odds with itself. It is confused. It is pursuing multiple tracks, and they do not run down the same lanes together in a coherent way. And we are seeing that confusion played out as it pertains to incredibly important issues like the treatment of these workers and the ability to reshore.
Given the outrage in Korea, how do you think this is going to affect relations with Seoul at a time where, as you say, the Trump administration does need this longtime ally as it competes with China?
Yeah, I mean, this is deeply concerning in many ways. I think this raid is one example. The tariffs scheme that has been, in practice now since Donald Trump's Liberation Day, that has really alienated allies around the world is deeply concerning, or should be concerning from a long-term perspective. And so, the reality is that the Trump administration is alienating friends that we need to do the very thing they say they want to do, which is to confront China. So it doesn't make a good deal of sense to those of us who work in this area and think about foreign policy, national security, economic security a good deal. And I do think Americans may not be the top of mind foreign alliances as much as things like the economy and inflation, but it certainly will be as we move forward. And the allies we have counted on, not just South Korea, but you look at what's happened with India, for instance, in just the last few weeks or month, and the list goes on, that is deeply, deeply troubling because it impacts our national and economic security in the long term.
I guess to your point, as you're alluding to, it also begs the question for many of these U.S. partners of how reliable Washington is as an ally. Do you think that affects the calculus for these countries in tariff negotiations going forward?
It absolutely does. I mean, we have a bit of chaos over here as it pertains to the tariffs because we had a recent court decision putting a hold on them. So they remain in place, but the court has knocked them down. So it's a confusing time if you're negotiating. Not to mention, it's difficult to trust when you are told that the goal is to reduce your tariffs by investing, and you invest, and then you see pictures like this. So I think if you're a foreign investor, you've got to be very concerned. If you're an ally, you've got to be very concerned. And of course, the reality is there is a good deal of a sense of betrayal and humiliation that in foreign policy is always, always something that you need to avoid. And so for the United States and people who care about alliances, this is troubling, but the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself has a very different view of these things. And you see this kind of contradiction in so many areas in which he works. Just to give you one example, this is a president who claims that he is he is the road to peace and that he has resolved 7 wars. And yet they attacked and they struck down a boat just off of Venezuela the other day. Those contradictory messages, are things that we are hearing an enormous amount about over here, and people are concerned.
You mentioned Venezuela, and of course, the immigration issue with Latin America has also been huge from the moment that President Trump took office, right? The fact remains that these businesses want to go into the U.S., invest, and the practical matter is these visas and being allowed to operate with skilled workers. But immigration is a political matter in the U.S. How do these two really combine, and what's the path forward then when, in order to bring political change in the U.S., there are so many other factors that you need to consider?
Yeah, the change to the immigration system, including the visa system, is going to have to come vis-a-vis Congress. And that is the problem. For all the talk about Donald Trump, and certainly I've spent a good deal of time talking to you guys about Donald Trump, the reality is much of this has to come via congressional legislation and Congress, not just this Congress, but going back many, many years in the United States, has been unable to address the number of problems we have with our immigration system, going back all the way to 2000 with the election of George W. Bush and even before. So I'm talking a long time. And to do these kinds of fixes to the immigration system, which has been broken, it's going to require an act of Congress, not just executive orders by the president. But of course, that is not something we have seen Congress having the will or the ability to do. And hence the frustration on all presidents president's parts, including Donald Trump, as to how to move forward on immigration and to do so in a way that allows us to build our manufacturing base and to make sure we maintain our security, both economic and military. It's a real conundrum with the Congress that doesn't seem to be able to pass basic legislation, even, by the way, our budget, let alone immigration, which is much more complicated.
A complex issue. Jeanne, thank you for your insights. Jeanne Sheehan Zaino is Bloomberg political contributor. We'll have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.